There's a reason most gardeners burn out within 3 years. They've been taught a method that guarantees endless labor. Dig the soil, amend the bed, plant the seeds, watch half of it fail, clear it out, start over. Nobody told them there was another way. The most productive gardens on earth share one thing in common. Almost no one touches the soil. No tilling, no turning, no annual destruction of the system that makes plants thrive. What you're about to learn isn't new. It's ancient, practiced by food forest designers and serious homesteaders, who figured out that working with the soil creates something that compounds in value for decades. Here's how to build a garden you'll never have to dig again. Let's start with the foundation, the sheet mulching base layer. Most people hear no dig and assume it means skipping the hard part. It doesn't. It means replacing one type of work with a smarter type of work once at the beginning. Sheet mulching converts any patch of land into productive growing space. Without breaking ground, you're not digging, you're suffocating. Lay thick cardboard directly on whatever exists now. Don't remove the grass, don't pull the weeds, they become food. On top of that cardboard barrier, stack layers of organic material. Straw, wood chips, compost, aged manure, leaf mold. The layers should be 8 to 12 inches deep because they compress. What happens underneath is biology doing the work for you. The existing vegetation dies without light. Earthworms arrive by the thousands. Fungal networks begin threading through the material. Within 6 months, you have dark, living soil that no rototiller could ever create. Here's what most people miss. This base layer keeps working for years. Every time you add more mulch on top, you're feeding the system. The soil gets deeper, the biology gets richer, the labor stays at zero. The cardboard layer must be continuous, with overlapping seams of at least 6 inches. Any gap becomes a highway for aggressive weeds to push through. Use large commercial boxes, flatten them completely, and remove all tape and staples. Tape doesn't decompose and creates channels that weeds exploit. Your material layers matter too. Alternate carbon-heavy materials like straw and wood chips, with nitrogen-rich materials like grass clippings and kitchen scraps. This balance feeds the decomposers efficiently and prevents the mat from becoming a soggy, anaerobic mess or a dry, nitrogen-starved pile that takes years to break down. Timing makes a difference. The best results come from sheet mulching in fall, allowing the entire winter for decomposition before spring planting. But you can sheet mulch at any time if you're willing to plant into pockets of finished compost while the rest of the system matures around your crops. One well-built sheet mulch bed will outproduce a tilled bed within 2 years and continue improving for a decade or more. Perennial vegetables that replace annual work. Here's where most gardeners leave serious productivity on the table. Annual vegetables are maintenance traps. You plant, harvest, clear, and repeat. That's not gardening, that's a job. Perennial vegetables do something different. You plant them once, and they return with more vigor, producing harvests that expand over time rather than reset. Tree collard are a perennial brassica that grows into a permanent shrub. Most people have never heard of them, which is exactly why they're worth knowing about. You don't replant them, you just harvest leaves continuously. One plant can produce for 15 years or more, surviving mild winters and bouncing back from hard cuts. Walking onions, sometimes called Egyptian onions, produce bulbs at the top of their stalks that bend over, plant themselves, and create new plants. You harvest the bulbs, eat the greens, and the colony expands on its own, no intervention required. Scarlet runner beans are technically perennial in zones 7 and warmer. Even in colder areas, their roots often survive under deep mulch and return in spring. Beautiful red flowers that attract pollinators and protein-rich beans that dry well for storage. The list continues. Perennial kale varieties, Good King, Henry C. Kale, Sorrel, Lovage, Ramps. What makes these special isn't just that they come back, it's that they improve the soil while they grow. Their roots stay in place year after year, creating channels for water and air, feeding soil organisms, mining nutrients from deep underground. They're not just food, they're infrastructure. Perennial vegetables also tend to be more nutritious than annuals. They've had years to develop deep root systems that access mineral reserves unavailable to shallow-rooted annuals planted fresh each season. Studies have shown that perennial greens often contain higher concentrations of vitamins, minerals, and beneficial compounds. There's also a pest resistance advantage. Established perennial plants have developed relationships with beneficial insects in your garden. Predator populations build up around them. Disease resistance strengthens as the plant matures. Compare this to annual seedlings that start vulnerable every year, attracting pests without any established defense network. Every perennial vegetable you add reduces your annual workload and increases your total yield. Strategic woody perennials. This is where the real leverage happens. Most gardeners think of shrubs and trees as ornamental, something for the edges of the property, background. But in a never-dig garden, woody perennials are primary producers. Think about what a mature blueberry bush does. Once established, it produces for 40 years or more with almost no care beyond occasional pruning and mulch renewal. A single plant can yield 15 pounds of fruit annually. Scale that to 10 plants, and you're looking at 150 pounds of blueberries from something you planted once. But blueberries are just the obvious example. Look deeper. Elderberries produce massive quantities of fruit most people ignore. Both the berries and the flowers are edible. They're medicinal. They make excellent wine. One established elderberry can produce 30 pounds of berries per year, and they spread through suckers, so your harvest increases without additional planting. Hazelnuts are another overlooked producer. They're one of the few nuts that grow as shrubs rather than full-size trees, which means they fit in smaller spaces. They produce in 3 to 5 years from planting and continue for decades. Hazelnuts store almost indefinitely and command premium prices if you ever decide to sell. Goji berries, honeyberries, currants, gooseberries, jostaberries, sea buckthorn. The strategy here isn't to pick one. It's to layer multiple woody perennials that mature at different rates and produce at different times. While you're waiting for your hazelnuts to bear, your currants are already producing. While your elderberries are flowering, your blueberries are setting fruit. This creates a harvest calendar that spans months, not weeks. And every year as the plants mature, the yields compound. The economics deserve serious attention. A single hazelnut bush, purchased for maybe $20 as a bare root plant, will produce nuts worth several $100s over its lifetime if you value them at market prices. But you won't sell them. You'll eat them. And every pound of hazelnuts you harvest is a pound you didn't buy. This is the hidden financial leverage of woody perennials. They convert a one-time expense into decades of production. No annual seed purchases, no transplant failures, no replanting after a bad season. You're not gardening, you're building productive assets. If you're finding this approach makes sense, consider subscribing. You're exactly the kind of person this channel is for. Living mulch systems. Here's a technique that separates casual gardeners from people who truly understand how soil works. Living mulch means using low-growing plants as permanent ground cover, instead of wood chips or straw. The plants do everything dead mulch does: suppress weeds, retain moisture, regulate temperature. But they also add nitrogen, attract beneficial insects, and produce secondary harvests. White clover is the classic choice. It fixes nitrogen from the air, feeds the soil, stays low enough not to compete with taller crops, and provides continuous forage for bees. You can walk on it, mow it occasionally, and it just keeps performing. But there are more interesting options most people never explore. Strawberries work as living mulch in the right conditions. The plants spread through runners, cover bare soil quickly, and produce a fruit harvest while they're at it. Under fruit trees, between raised beds, along pathways, strawberries do triple duty. Creeping thyme is another option for drier areas. It handles foot traffic, suppresses weeds aggressively, and provides culinary herbs and pollinator habitat. The fragrance alone is worth the investment. Sweet potato vines in warmer climates can cover large areas in a single season. The leaves are edible greens, and at the end of the year, you harvest the tubers. The soil beneath is better than when you started. The principle here is that bare soil is a liability. In nature, soil is never bare. Something is always growing, dying, feeding, cycling. When you use living mulch, you're mimicking that pattern. The ground stays covered, the biology stays fed, and you're not buying or hauling mulch materials. There's a pest control benefit that often goes unrecognized. Living mulch creates habitat complexity at ground level. That complexity supports ground beetles, rove beetles, and other predators that patrol at night eating slugs, snails, and pest larvae. A thick layer of wood chips doesn't provide the same ecosystem services because it lacks the living root systems and plant diversity that these beneficial insects require. Fruit trees on dwarfing rootstock. Most people think fruit trees mean waiting a decade for production. That was true 50 years ago. It's not true now. Modern fruit trees grafted onto dwarfing rootstock can produce significant harvests in 3 to 4 years. They stay manageable size, often under 8 feet, which means easier pruning, easier harvesting, and more trees per space. Here's what most people don't understand about fruit tree guilds in a no-dig system. The tree becomes the anchor for an entire mini ecosystem. Under the tree, you plant nitrogen fixers like clover. Around the drip line, you establish comfrey that mines nutrients from the subsoil. Deeper out, you add dynamic accumulators that make nutrients available near the surface when you chop and drop the leaves. The tree doesn't exist in isolation. It's the center of a productive system that improves the soil, suppresses weeds, attracts beneficial insects, and yields multiple harvests from a single footprint. An apple tree on M27 rootstock produces fruit from a plant you could grow in a large container. Pears on quince rootstock stay compact and productive. Cherries on Geisler rootstock bear earlier and smaller than traditional trees. The spacing calculations work differently. With dwarf trees, standard apple trees need 30 feet between them. Dwarf trees can be planted as close as 4 feet. This means you can fit 8 or 10 varieties in the space that would hold 2 standard trees. More varieties means extended harvest windows, better pollination, and reduced risk if one variety has an off year. The flavor diversity alone justifies the approach. Instead of relying on whatever the grocery store stocks, which is typically varieties selected for shipping durability rather than taste, you can grow heirloom varieties that were abandoned commercially specifically because they don't survive industrial handling. These are apples that taste like something, grown fresh and picked at peak ripeness, from trees you planted once. Nitrogen-fixing anchors. This is the secret engine that powers productive no-dig systems for decades. Most soils are nitrogen limited. That's why conventional gardeners add fertilizer every season. They're chasing a nutrient that keeps getting depleted. It's expensive, it's labor-intensive, and it creates dependency on external inputs. Nitrogen-fixing plants break that cycle permanently. These are plants that host bacteria in their root nodules, capable of converting atmospheric nitrogen into forms plants can use. When the plants die back or when you chop and drop their foliage, that nitrogen becomes available to everything around them. Some nitrogen fixers are obvious: clover, beans, peas. But the powerful ones for a permanent no-dig system are the perennial woody species that keep working year after year. Autumn olive, despite being considered invasive in some regions, is one of the most productive nitrogen-fixing shrubs available. It produces edible berries, hosts nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and creates sheltered microclimates for other plants. Where it's appropriate to grow, it transforms poor soil into productive land within a few years. Siberian pea shrub is another option. It produces edible seeds, fixes significant nitrogen, and tolerates harsh conditions. It's been used for centuries in food forest system across cold climates. Galmi is an underutilized shrub with edible berries that taste somewhere between sour cherry and rhubarb. It fixes nitrogen, grows quickly, and produces in dense shade where other fruit would fail. The strategy is to interplant nitrogen fixers throughout your no-dig system, not in one corner, but distributed everywhere. Under fruit trees, along fence lines, between berry patches, wherever there's space. Studies show nitrogen fixing cover crops can add 50 to 200 pounds of nitrogen equivalent per acre annually. In a home garden, this translates to soil that improves year after year, producing darker color, better structure, and increased biological activity without purchased amendments. Over time, these plants build soil fertility from nothing. You stop buying amendments. Your other plants grow faster. The system feeds itself. Deep-rooted dynamic accumulators. If nitrogen fixers are the engine, dynamic accumulators are the mining operation. Most plants have shallow root systems that compete for surface nutrients, but certain plants send roots deep, sometimes 6 feet or more, into subsoil that other plants can't access. They pull up minerals like potassium, phosphorus, calcium, and trace elements, storing them in their leaves. When you cut those leaves and let them decompose on the surface, those deep minerals become available to shallow-rooted crops. You're cycling nutrients upward from reserves that would otherwise be locked away. Comfrey is the most famous example, and for good reason. A single comfrey plant can produce over 100 pounds of biomass per year. The leaves are rich in nitrogen, potassium, and trace minerals. You cut them 4 or 5 times per season, pile them around other plants as mulch, and watch your fruit trees and berry bushes explode with growth. Comfrey isn't the only option. Dandelions, often treated as weeds, are dynamic accumulators with taproots that can reach 10 feet. The entire plant is edible. The leaves are nutritious greens. The roots make a coffee substitute. Every time you let them grow and then chop them back, they're improving your soil. Yarrow accumulates potassium and copper. Chicory mines calcium. Nettles concentrate iron and nitrogen. In a no-dig system, you don't remove these plants. You manage them. You let them grow, cut them periodically, and leave the material in place. They become permanent nutrient pumps that keep your garden productive without purchased fertilizer. The chop and drop technique deserves attention because it's so simple that people assume it can't be effective. Cut the above-ground portion. Let the foliage fall where it lands or pile it around nearby plants. Leave it. That's it. No composting, no hauling, no processing. As the material breaks down, earthworms pull it underground, fungi colonize it, and the nutrients become available to plant roots. A pile of comfrey leaves can disappear in 3 weeks during warm weather. Self-seeding annual pockets. Here's where we integrate the best of annual production without the worst of annual labor. Some annual plants, when allowed to complete their life cycle, drop seeds that germinate the following season. You don't replant them. They replant themselves. Your job shifts from planting to thinning, which is far less work. Lettuce does this beautifully. Let a few plants bolt and go to seed. Next spring, you'll have lettuce seedlings everywhere. Thin them, transplant them. Eat them as microgreens. You haven't bought seeds or started flats. Arugula is even more aggressive. Once established in a bed, it will self-sow continuously. You harvest what you want, let the rest seed, and maintain a permanent supply. With zero effort. Dill, cilantro, parsley, fennel, calendula, borage. These are plants that, once introduced to a no-dig system, become permanent features. They move around the garden, finding spots they like, filling gaps, providing harvests and pollinator support, without ever being deliberately planted. The key is designating specific areas where self-seeding is allowed. Don't try to control it completely. Let the chaos happen in defined zones. You'll end up with abundance you didn't plan and diversity you didn't pay for. There's a natural selection benefit that emerges over multiple generations of self-seeding. The seeds that germinate successfully are, by definition, the ones best adapted to your specific conditions. Your soil type, your microclimate, your pest pressures all filter the population. After a few years, you have a locally adapted strain that performs better in your garden than anything you could buy. Commercial seeds are bred for average conditions. Your self-seeded populations are bred for your exact conditions. This is home-scale plant breeding happening automatically. Drop a comment below if you're already using self-seeding plants. I'd love to hear what's working for you. Mushroom integration. Most gardeners think of mushrooms as something you buy at the store. But in a no-dig system, mushrooms are a production layer that most people completely miss. The same wood chips and straw you're using as mulch can also grow edible fungi. You're not adding work, you're adding a harvest. Wine cap mushrooms, also called King Stropharia, are the easiest entry point. You inoculate fresh wood chips with spawn, spread them in shaded paths or under trees, and within a year you're harvesting mushrooms the size of dinner plates. They fruit repeatedly for several years as long as you keep adding fresh wood chips to the bed. Shiitake can be grown on logs that would otherwise be firewood or waste. Drill holes, insert spawn, and wait. The logs produce for 5 to 7 years with almost no attention. Oyster mushrooms grow on straw, cardboard, coffee grounds, or practically any organic material. They're the fastest to fruit and produce abundantly in cool weather when most vegetables aren't performing. The fungal networks from these mushrooms also benefit the plants around them. They improve soil structure, break down tough organic materials, and exchange nutrients with plant roots through mycorrhizal partnerships. You're not just getting mushrooms. You're accelerating the entire decomposition and nutrient cycling process that makes no-dig gardening work. Permanent pathways as water management. Here's something that trips up most new no-dig gardeners. They focus all their attention on the growing beds and treat pathways as afterthoughts. But in a well-designed no-dig system, pathways aren't just for walking. They're water management infrastructure. When you build permanent raised beds with sunken pathways between them, rainwater naturally flows into the paths. If those paths are filled with wood chips, the water is absorbed and held, slowly releasing into the adjacent beds. This means your beds stay moist without irrigation from below, even during dry spells. The pathways act as reservoirs. Over time, the wood chip paths break down into rich compost. You can scoop this material onto your beds as amendment, then refill the paths with fresh chips. You're generating fertility in the spaces between your plants. The pathways also become habitat for beneficial organisms, ground beetles that eat slugs, predatory insects that control aphids. The decomposing wood chips create exactly the moist, sheltered environment these allies need. The geometry of your pathway layout affects water management significantly. Paths that run across slopes capture and slow runoff, reducing erosion and increasing infiltration. Some gardeners line paths with edging, but this can backfire. Hard barriers prevent the lateral movement of water, soil biology, and root systems between paths and beds. Stop thinking of pathways as wasted space. They're part of the productive system. Perennial herb anchors. Herbs are usually treated as minor additions to a garden, something for the windowsill or a small bed near the kitchen door. In a no-dig system designed for decades of production, perennial herbs are structural elements. They're workhorses. Rosemary grows into a large shrub that lives for 20 years or more. It's drought-tolerant once established, produces culinary harvests continuously, and attracts pollinators throughout its long flowering season. Sage performs similarly. A single plant can spread to cover several feet, suppress weeds in its vicinity, and produce more leaves than any household could use. It's medicinal, culinary, and beautiful. Oregano is nearly indestructible. It spreads through underground runners, tolerates poor soil, and comes back stronger after cutting. Greek oregano, Italian oregano, Cuban oregano, each with different flavors and growing habits. Lavender creates permanent structure, attracts massive quantities of bees, and produces harvests that sell for premium prices at farmers' markets. If you decide to monetize, these herbs don't just sit there, they shape the garden. They create microclimates. They define zones. They anchor spaces that might otherwise turn weedy or require constant management. The aromatic compounds that make herbs valuable in the kitchen also provide pest management benefits in the garden. Rosemary, sage, thyme, and oregano all produce volatile oils that confuse and repel many common insect pests. Planting them throughout your productive areas distributes these protective compounds. Propagation is almost embarrassingly easy with established perennial herbs. Rosemary roots from cuttings stuck directly in moist soil. Oregano spreads through runners that can be divided and transplanted. Thyme creeps along the ground, rooting as it goes. One original plant can become dozens without any seed starting, greenhouse space, or specialized equipment. Plant them once, in positions where they can mature undisturbed, and they become permanent fixtures that anchor your no-dig system. Thoughtful guild design, everything we've discussed so far becomes dramatically more powerful when you combine elements into guilds. A guild is a grouping of plants chosen, specifically because they support each other, not just planted together, but functionally interdependent. The classic example is a fruit tree guild. The tree provides the structure and main harvest. Beneath it, nitrogen-fixing clover feeds the soil. Around the drip line, comfrey mines deep nutrients and provides mulch material. Between plants, strawberries cover bare soil and yield a secondary harvest. At the edges, chives or garlic deter pests and provide additional food. Each plant has a purpose. Nothing is ornamental only, everything contributes. But guilds don't have to center on trees. You can build berry guilds around a central blueberry or elderberry. You can create vegetable guilds around perennial kale or artichokes. The principle is stacking functions in space and time. Multiple harvests from the same footprint. Multiple soil benefits from the same planting. Year after year, the guild matures and its productivity increases. Design effective guilds by thinking about root depth, light requirements, harvest timing, and nutrient needs. You want plants with different root profiles, so they're accessing different soil layers rather than competing. You want a canopy structure that allows light to reach all members. You want harvests spread across the season, rather than everything ripening simultaneously. A well-designed guild also includes pest management. Certain plants attract beneficial insects that prey on pests affecting other guild members. Yarrow attracts parasitic wasps that control aphids. Dill and fennel host beneficial hoverflies. This is the opposite of monoculture rows that deplete the soil and require constant inputs. Guilds build complexity, and complexity builds resilience. Appropriate variety selection, the final piece that most people get wrong, is choosing the right varieties for their specific conditions. It's not enough to plant an apple tree. Which apple tree matters enormously for long-term success without ongoing intervention. Disease-resistant varieties reduce or eliminate the need for sprays. A Liberty apple has genetic resistance to apple scab, fire blight, cedar apple rust, and powdery mildew. You can grow it organically with zero chemical inputs. Compare that to a variety like Honeycrisp, which looks great in advertisements but requires intensive disease management to produce clean fruit. Similarly, locally adapted varieties handle your specific climate without extra protection. Heritage varieties developed in your region over centuries are already tuned to your conditions. They survive cold snaps, handle summer heat, and resist local pest pressure because they evolved alongside it. This applies to every category of plant we've discussed. Choose blueberries bred for your chill hours. Select grape varieties suited to your humidity levels. Plant nut trees appropriate for your frost dates. Find specialty nurseries in your region that grow their own stock. Plants started locally are pre-adapted to your conditions. They've already survived similar climate, soil, and pest environments. Heirloom and heritage varieties deserve special consideration. They were selected by generations of gardeners who valued flavor, storage quality, and ease of management over shipping durability. Many are more resilient than modern commercial varieties because they were bred under organic conditions. The upfront research pays permanent dividends. A well-chosen variety thrives for decades with minimal intervention. A poorly chosen variety struggles, produces poorly, and eventually fails no matter how much work you throw at it. The time investment in variety research is trivial compared to the time investment of establishing a plant and waiting years for production. Get it right the first time. So that's the system. Not a single technique, but an integrated approach where every element supports every other element. Sheet mulching creates the foundation. Perennial vegetables reduce annual labor. Woody perennials provide decades of yield. Living mulch covers and feeds the soil. Dwarf fruit trees anchor productive guilds. Nitrogen fixers build fertility from air. Dynamic accumulators cycle deep nutrients upward. Self-seeding annuals maintain themselves. Mushrooms add a hidden harvest layer. Pathways manage water and generate compost. Perennial herbs create permanent structure. Thoughtful guilds stack functions. And appropriate varieties ensure long-term success. You don't have to implement everything at once. That would be overwhelming and unnecessary. Here's what I want you to do instead. Pick 3 elements from this list. Just 3. Choose the ones that fit your space, your climate, and the time you have available this season. Maybe you start with sheet mulching a single bed, planting 1 nitrogen-fixing shrub, and establishing a living clover ground cover. That's enough. That's the beginning of a system that will compound in value for the rest of your life. Do that first. Let it teach you. Watch what happens when you stop fighting the soil and start feeding it. Then next season, add 3 more elements. Within 5 years, you'll have a garden that produces abundantly with a fraction of the work. Within 10 years, you'll have something that resembles a food forest more than a traditional garden, and you'll wonder why anyone does it the old way. The people who figure this out early have a massive advantage. While others are trapped in the dig and replant cycle, you'll be harvesting from systems that get better every year without additional labor. That's not a fantasy. That's how productive ecosystems actually work when you design them correctly. If this changed how you think about gardening, hit subscribe. More videos are coming that go deeper on specific techniques we covered today. Now go pick your 3. Write them down. That's your commitment. A garden that produces for decades starts with decisions you make this week.